Hello again. Here we are in week 8, focusing our attention on emotional and spiritual health. I hope you've already checked out the learning goals for this week and the specific activities involved for this week so that you have a kind of context for what I'm going to say here today. You know, one of the struggles that all teachers have in teaching a course, but especially in a course like this, is that it's impossible to attend to everything that is essential. A teacher, I think also pastors, leaders, often sit in front of the question, what really matters? Or other questions that follow from that. What do they really need to understand? Or what words and concepts do they need to know? Which people do they need to meet and read and be introduced to? Which challenges and rich rewards? In some respects, these are all unanswerable questions on many levels, and often it comes down just to getting it done. And I think I may be preaching to the choir on this one. But this week, we turn to one of the most challenging topics of this course. In some respects, it's really the heart of this course. I sometimes think it would be better to leave it alone than to address it on its surface. However, I have worked with and coached many pastors and leaders in the Church of God, Anderson, and elsewhere. And I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the topic of emotional, healthy spirituality is one of the most important topics that we could deal with and directly related to spiritual formation. I have seen the results, the often sad outcomes of emotionally unhealthy leaders, the often very sad results in their own lives and in the lives of those they lead, and even in the lives of their own family. And frankly, it seems to me we've seen way too much of that in the last few years. For several years, I worked in the National SHAPE program of Church of God Ministries, training coaches who could in turn work alongside other pastors to help them grow into emotionally, spiritually healthy pastors and persons. We learned that leading churches can be toxic to the leader's family, and of course, the persons they lead. And we're just kind of stunned by that and asked, why? Why is that? There are, as you might suspect, many reasons, and I want to introduce this week by calling your attention to them and inviting you into a time of personal and professional assessment. In spiritual formation, self-awareness, self-reflection, and even self-appraisal are crucial practices. And I hope that you will take this information to heart as you look at your reality. There's no question that church leaders, especially pastors, are often caught, so to speak, in the crosshairs. And if you don't know what that means, you should look it up. Pastors often find themselves struggling to manage a church full of, what shall we call them, contrarians. That is, people who believe what they believe strongly and passionately, and even more significantly, righteously. Well, even though they can't all be right, pastors still find themselves struggling to keep the peace and manage their own health, their own spirituality, their own emotional intelligence, and their own sense of calling, their own lives, in other words. Not a few pastors have often wondered how this happened. A significant consequence of this is that pastors often find themselves struggling to keep their own health and relationships and their sense of call at the center of the work. And I think that's a crucial understanding, that often we lose the center. So many people we serve, if they're honest, consider pastor a hired hand, when that's not the reality at all. Some years back in SHAPE, we discovered tragically and ironically and surprisingly, that one of the most serious causes of leader train wrecks among holiness leaders is, in fact, the idea of holiness itself. Holiness was, in many cases, most cases perhaps, still defined as synonymous with perfection. Now, I'm not going to get into a theological or doctrinal argument or debate about that, but I am going to underscore it, not because I'm the authority, but because I heard it repeatedly from men and women leaders in the form of a confession. Because we know we're not perfect, but are supposed to be, we end up deceiving the people we lead. We end up deceiving our own families. We deceive ourselves. A deception that becomes a way of life that can only be described as toxic. This toxicity leads to a plethora of dangers and downfalls. It can lead to the expense of a great deal of personal energy just to appear perfect, aka holy, and tragically leads to increasing distance from those who might discover that their pastor, their leader, is simply human. I'm not blaming the doctrine of holiness, or you can be sure the Holy Spirit for this. I believe that holiness is a beautiful truth, and that the nurturing presence of the Holy Spirit matters more than words can say. But I do think we need a pretty thoughtful reconsideration of what we mean and teach when we talk about the holy life. We should follow the prime directive, do no harm. And honestly, much harm has been done. Perhaps to you. For this session, I'm asking you to watch an introductory video by Peter Scazzero on the healthy emotional and spiritual life. This video is an introductory session of a 10-video series. I'm neither recommending nor urging that you enroll. It's not part of the course beyond this one. I am asking you to watch this first video and to use it to become aware of the risks and dangers, and in the light of your spiritual practices and disciplines, to ask what you might do to refresh your emotionally healthy spirituality and, if needed, reclaim your calling. It is timely to bring this particular focus up in the week we talk about practices, because as you can see in Scazzero's list, he sees a specific and important link between spiritual and emotional health and spiritual practices. And your journaling this week will focus on these 7 considerations that Scazzero talks briefly about in his video. 1, to get a clear understanding of emotionally healthy leadership within the church. To consider your own life in terms of emotional health, to consider your own leadership in terms of emotional health, to consider your personal relationships in terms of emotional health, to consider your professional relationships in terms of emotional health, and to understand the importance, see this, of spiritual practice in achieving and maintaining emotional health. I hope that the journals this week will give you the space to think very seriously about this topic in personal, familial, professional, and even community contexts. There you will find specific prompts related to healthy emotional and spiritual life. This list of Scazzeros. You are not, of course, required to respond to all of these in your journal, but I do encourage you to carefully and prayerfully and honestly respond to the prompts that come closest to your home and work. The exception is that I do want you to define holiness. What is your understanding of holiness? How do you think it should be understood in the life of the church? No quotes, no authorities. What's your personal definition and why? Finally, this week, I'm also asking you to begin another project that will stretch across a few weeks. It concerns the book Life Together. It concerns getting in touch with other persons in the class. Be sure to watch the PowerPoint on Bonhoeffer and follow through with the steps outlined there. And as always, if you have questions, you know how to reach me. God bless. Talk to you again later.